Lord Vex hired a human chef to mock humanity at the Centennial Gala. The main ingredient, a living Orakthal, a telepathic entity that feeds on terror. Nobody warned Chef Callum Reeves. When his blade touched the creature, a psychic scream paralyzed every alien in the hall except the human. His brain, immune to the signal, defaulted to rage. He grabbed the monster's neural core and squeezed. The galaxy's most feared predator had just met a human who refused to serve anything but a perfect appetizer. Lord Vex thought hearing a human chef was the ultimate joke. He wanted to mock Earth at the Centennial Gala. Then he handed Callum a living Orakthal, a telepathic god that consumes minds. No one warned him. What happens when a Death World cook discovers his ingredient is a hung god? The answer changed everything. The Raxian Consortium had ruled the Orion Spur for 6,000 cycles. Their technology folded space. Their diplomacy crushed empires. And their Centennial Gala was the most exclusive event in the known galaxy. Ambassadors from 17 species attended, commodores of war, keepers of ancient bloodlines. Lord Vex, third in line to the Consortium throne, wanted to make a statement. He decided the entertainment would be a human chef. Not because he respected human culture. Because he didn't. In the Consortium's rigid hierarchy, humanity was a footnote, barely a century out of their home system. No telepathy, no exoskeleton, no natural weapons. They were soft. They were loud. They cooked their food with fire like savages. To Vex, hearing a human to cater the gala was comedy. A mascot. Proof that his eccentricity knew no bounds. His advisors had found Callum Reeves operating a small seafood restaurant on a remote human colony. The man was massive, silent, with hands scarred by decades of handling deep-sea predators. His family had fished the abyssal trenches of Earth for 8 generations. Callum didn't care about galactic politics. He cared about freshness, texture, and the precise temperature at which protein denatures. Vex offered an obscene sum. Callum signed without blinking. When Callum arrived at the orbital station, he requested only one thing, the finest local ingredient available. He wanted to prepare his signature dish, a minimalist preparation that showcased the ingredient itself. The kitchen staff exchanged glances. They led him to a refrigerated vault deep in the station's core. The door hissed open, revealing a single tank of nutrient brine. Inside floated the Orakthal. The Orakthal was the galaxy's most forbidden delicacy, rumored to grant transcendent visions to those who consumed its flesh. A single bite could cost more than a starship. But the staff didn't tell Callum the whole story. The Orakthal was not an animal. It was a sapient telepathic entity, a living node of a hive mind worshipped by a fringe death cult. Its consciousness was ancient, vast, and permanently ravenous. In the wild, it hunted minds like a spider hunts flies, paralyzing prey with psychic fear before consuming their sanity. The creature in the tank had not eaten in months. It was mad with hunger. And as Callum stepped closer, its iridescent flesh began to pulse. The Consortium's head of security watched from a monitor. "This will be over in seconds," he told Vex. "The human's brain will shut down. We'll have the body incinerated. It's a flawless party trick." Callum removed the creature from the tank. He laid it on the cutting board. He raised his blade. The Orakthal's telepathic scream hit the station like a pressure wave. Every Raxian in the dining hall collapsed, seizing, screaming, clawing at their skulls. Callum Reeves grunted. He felt a mild headache. His amygdala-flooded human brain simply processed the attack as a sudden burst of adrenaline, the same chemical cocktail he'd surfed while wrestling 1,000-pound tuna on stormy seas. He didn't collapse. He got angry. He clamped his left hand around the creature's neural core and squeezed. The Orakthal screamed again, but this time in a frequency no Raxian had ever heard. It was the shriek of a predator who had just realized it was prey. The galaxy's most terrifying consciousness, a mind that had devoured entire civilizations, looked into the eyes of a human chef and saw nothing it could touch. Callum's thoughts were opaque. His psyche was not a fortress, it was a black box. The creature's telepathy returned only static, only a single looping directive: prepare the dish. The Orakthal had devoured priests, kings, and would-be conquerors. It had broken the minds of telepathic species who thought themselves invincible. In all its millennia of existence, it had never encountered a consciousness that simply refused to engage. Callum's mind was not defended by psychic walls. It was empty of the signals the creature relied on, no fear loops, no ego to unravel, no dreams to corrupt. Just a singular focus, knife, board, ingredient. Callum pressed down. The blade parted luminescent membrane. The creature's body convulsed, its chromatophores flashing colors never before seen by any living being in the consortium. But Callum didn't see a god. He saw a tough piece of meat that needed tenderizing. The Orakthal's psychic scream shifted frequency. It wasn't attacking anymore. It was broadcasting a distress signal, a call that rippled through subspace, bypassing every technological relay, reaching ears that had been listening for millennia. On a dead moon in the Varian Rift, a death cult called the Chorus Eternal heard the call. They had worshipped the Orakthal for 3,000 cycles, believing it to be the last living fragment of a primordial hunger that once consumed galaxies. They had protected it, fed it, ensured no one ever touched its flesh. The moment the signal hit, their high priestess, a being known only as the Mouth of Silence, opened her 7 eyes. "The god bleeds," she whispered. "Someone is eating the divine." Within minutes, a ship was launched, a sleek black vessel coated in ancient, screaming prayers, carrying the most devoted of the cult's assassins. Their destination, the Raxian orbital station, but Callum knew none of this. He was humming an old sea shanty his grandfather taught him. He scored the flesh, applied a dry rub of mineral salts he prepared earlier from the station's baseline pantry, and set a pan on the heat. In the dining hall, Lord Vex was crawling toward the service entrance. His elite guests lay scattered like broken dolls. Some were catatonic, others wept uncontrollably, their telepathic receptors overloaded by the Orakthal's dying screams. Vex's own mind was ringing, but his arrogance was a powerful shield. He had to see what the human had done. He pulled himself up and pushed through the kitchen doors. And then he saw it. Callum Reeves, the primitive ape he had hired as a joke, was searing the Orakthal in a pan with garlic and imported butter. The most feared psychic entity in the quadrant was sizzling gently, releasing an aroma that was, against all logic, divine. What are you?" Vex managed. Callum glanced up, his expression unchanged. "Chef, now get out of my kitchen, you're dripping on the floor." Vex's security team, the ones who hadn't collapsed, were attempting to contain the situation. But the station was in chaos. The Orakthal's psychic pulse had tripped a dozen quarantine protocols. Automated systems had sealed entire sectors. And worse, the death cult ship had just dropped out of subspace within firing range. The Chorus Eternal did not negotiate. They did not issue warnings. Their doctrine stated that any being who consumed the flesh of the Orakthal must be eradicated, along with anyone who witnessed the desecration. They prepared to destroy the entire station. But the Mouth of Silence, connected telepathically to the dying god, sensed something impossible. The Orakthal was not dead, it was still alive, and for the first time in its existence it was not hungry. It was terrified not of the heat but of the man holding the pan. It was broadcasting a single, frantic thought. "Make it stop, please, anything." The cult's assassin vessel halted its attack vector. The Mouth of Silence in her sanctum aboard the ship touched the psychic link and projected her voice into the Orakthal's mind. "What can end an eternal hunger?" The creature's reply sent a shiver through every member of the chorus. "This one, this human, he is not food, he is the first thing I have ever recognized as a predator." On the station, Callum plated the dish. A single perfect portion of seared Orakthal, garnished with a reduction made from its own bioluminescent fluids. He stepped into the dining hall, surrounded by collapsed dignitaries, and set the plate before the only one still conscious, Lord Vex. "Your appetizer, my lord." Vex stared at the dish. The flesh glowed faintly, releasing a steam that smelled of ozone and longing. He knew that eating it would mark him forever. The Orakthal was still alive, its consciousness now bound to the meal itself. Consuming it would either grant him unimaginable power or make him a vessel for the god's eternal hunger. But the chef's eyes held no pity. They held only the expectation of a man who had done his job. And then the station's alarms changed tone. The wall screens flickered, displaying the approaching cult vessel, its hull inscribed with symbols that translated in real time. "We come to reclaim what has been stolen. Release the god or be unmade." Callum turned to look at the screen, wiped his hands on a towel, and frowned. He didn't understand the language, but he recognized a threat when he saw one. "I'm not done with the main course," he muttered. "They can wait their turn." This section is formatted for direct paste into VidRush custom script mode. The mouth of silence did not repeat herself. One moment the station was on alert, the next, every sentient being on board heard a voice inside their skull, soft, feminine, and utterly devoid of mercy. "You hold a fragment of the eternal hunger. Release it into our care, or every soul on this vessel will be unmade." Every being except Callum Reeves. He just heard the faint buzz of the kitchen ventilation and the sizzle of the butter still crackling in the pan. He had no idea the cult had spoken because his brain simply did not receive the transmission. Lord Vex, however, heard it clearly. His mind, still raw from the earlier psychic assault, buckled under the weight of the voice. He clutched the edge of the dining table, the appetizer plate trembling before him. The Orakthul's flesh pulsed gently, its bioluminescence syncing with his accelerated heartbeat. He realized with dawning horror that the creature was not just alive, it was aware, and it was watching him through the steam rising from its own seared tissue. "The human must be destroyed," the mouth of silence continued. "He has defiled the sacred flesh, but the god can be restored. Deliver the remains to us, now." On the cult's vessel, the assassins prepared for insertion. They did not use drop pods or breach charges. The Chorus Eternal moved through the spaces between molecules, slipping into reality through psychic gates keyed to the Orakthul's unique neural frequency. Three figures materialized silently in the kitchen behind Callum, tall, gaunt beings wrapped in living shadow, their elongated fingers tipped with bone blades coated in paralytic neurotoxin. They had killed kings. They had silenced entire monasteries. They were completely invisible to every sensor on the station, and they made the fatal mistake of assuming Callum would sense them, freeze, and die like all the others. Callum turned because he heard the faint whisper of displaced air. Decades of working in cramped galleys during rough seas had gifted him an almost supernatural awareness of his immediate surroundings. He saw the first assassin's reflection in the polished steel of the range hood. He did not scream. He did not reach for a weapon. He grabbed the nearest heavy object, a cast-iron skillet still rippling with hot oil, and swung it in a tight, brutal arc. The skillet connected with the lead assassin's skull. The bone blades never touched him. The creature crumpled, its shadowy cloak fluttering as it collapsed. The second assassin lunged. Callum sidestepped, letting the blade pass his ribs, and drove his elbow into the creature's throat with the same force he used to dispatch struggling halibut. The third hesitated, a fatal pause. Callum grabbed it by the collar of its living shadow and slammed its face into the cutting board, directly onto the spot where the Orakthul had twitched moments before. The remaining psychic residue of the god's terror flooded the assassin's senses. It screamed, a sound that went beyond sound, a psychic wail that echoed through the station. The mouth of silence, still connected through the link, felt her warriors fall. And for the first time in 3,000 cycles, she felt something she had never experienced: confusion. These were her elite. They could not be beaten by a single unblessed being, unless that being was not what it seemed. She reached out with her consciousness, trying to read the human. She encountered an impenetrable void. No fear, no desire, no grand ambition. Only a quiet, methodical determination to prepare a meal. And beneath that, something ancient and patient, honed by millions of years of evolution on a death world where predators wore every conceivable form. He was not a warrior. He was a survivor, and survivors on Earth had learned to kill gods long before they learned to speak. On the station, Vex watched the security feeds on his private display. He saw the three assassins lying broken on the galley floor and the human calmly returning to his stove, wiping the skillet clean with a rag. "Unacceptable," Vex hissed. "This is a diplomatic catastrophe." He turned to his head of security, who had just regained consciousness. "Activate emergency protocol. Seal the galley. Flood it with cryogenic gas. I want the human paralyzed and the Aurak Thul secured before the cult arrives in force. But the Mouth of Silence had already decided. She could not retrieve the god by force against a creature immune to her gifts. So she changed tactics. She opened a direct and very public channel to the entire station. "Lord Vex," she cooed, her voice dripping with poisoned honey. "You have a human who has violated our most sacred laws, but we are not unreasonable. Give us the human and we will spare your guests. Refuse and we will summon the void that waits, a vessel large enough to swallow this station whole. You have 100 heartbeats." Every guest in the dining hall looked at Vex. The anticipation was suffocating. Vex was many things: arrogant, cruel, vain, but he was not suicidal. The easy choice was to hand over the chef. It was what any rational consortium lord would do. But then Vex looked at the plate in front of him. The Aurak Thul's flesh shimmered, and a voice, the creature's voice, separate from the cult, thin and desperate, spoke directly into his mind. "Eat," it whispered. "Eat, and I will give you the power to command the chorus. They will worship you as they worship me. You will become the new god. Just eat." Vex's hand trembled. He had always craved power. The appetizer was right there. The cult was moments from obliterating him. The human chef was a liability. In a single motion, he could seize divinity. He lifted the fork. The Aurak Thul's flesh quivered in anticipation. The Mouth of Silence, sensing her god's intent, screamed a psychic warning, but it was too late. Vex ate. The effect was instantaneous. Lord Vex's eyes snapped open, pupils dilating into pools of liquid starlight. His body arched backward and a low hum filled the room. Every cultist, every assassin, every acolyte on the approaching vessel froze as their telepathic link to the Aurak Thul was severed and reattached to Vex. The god was no longer in the kitchen. It was inside the third most powerful being in the Raxian consortium. The Mouth of Silence fell to her knees aboard her ship. The Chorus Eternal had a new master, and the new master's first command echoed through the minds of every follower. "Protect me. Destroy anyone who threatens the vessel." Vex, or the thing wearing Vex's skin, turned toward the kitchen. The new god was hungry. And the first thing it wanted to consume was the only entity in the galaxy that had ever made it beg. It wanted to taste the chef. Callum Reeves, oblivious to the divine coup, set a fresh pan on the flame. He had a menu to fulfill, and the main course was still waiting. This section is formatted for direct paste into VidRush custom script mode. The kitchen doors slid open, not with the polite hiss of station hydraulics, but with the groaning strain of something forcing them apart. Lord Vex walked through. His eyes were no longer the cold amber of Raxian aristocracy. They swirled with galaxies, his pupils needle-thin and hungry. Behind him, through the breach, the Mouth of Silence and her entire congregation knelt in perfect, reverent rows, their black robes pooling like spilled oil across the dining hall floor. Callum Reeves, elbow-deep in a marinade of native herbs, looked up. "You're supposed to be at your table," he said, voice flat. "Service isn't over." "Human," the thing inside Vex spoke, its voice layered with 1,000 whispering echoes. "You carved my flesh. You burned my essence with fire and salt. I have consumed civilizations, and yet you made me afraid. Now I am reborn, and I will know what you taste like." Callum wiped his hands on his apron. He did not reach for a knife. He did not brace for a fight. Instead, he walked to the cold storage, opened the door, and pulled out a second Aurak Thul. This one was smaller, younger, its chromatophores pulsing with curious light rather than rage. He had found it in the vault while the first one was being butchered, a juvenile, dormant, overlooked. He had not told anyone. "This one's for the main course," he said, holding the smaller creature up by its neural sheath. It quivered but did not scream. It too had watched the human overpower its parent, and it had learned something its elders never had. This being was not a threat. He was a force of nature, and nature could be endured. The god inside Vex froze. It recognized its spawn. The Aurak Thul did not reproduce in any conventional sense. They were fragments of a singular infinite hunger shed like scales, but the bond was real. The larger creature had never considered that its offspring might survive contact with the human. It assumed annihilation. Yet here it was, calm, even docile, in the grip of the apex predator of Earth. "What? What have you done to it?" The layered voice cracked. "Nothing, just fed it some scraps." Callum set the juvenile down on a clean cutting board. It stayed put. Your kind eats mine, but that one spent 3 hours in my kitchen and it figured out I don't have a mind you can taste, so it ate the leftover fish heads instead. Turns out you can survive on physical food. You're just too arrogant to try. The revelation crashed through the psychic network like a tidal wave. The mouth of silence, still kneeling, gasped. Her entire theology was built on the Aurak Thul's eternal, insatiable hunger, the idea that it could only be sated by consuming sentience. If the god could eat matter, if the hunger was a choice rather than a curse, then the cult had been built on a lie. Our doctrine, she whispered, 3,000 cycles of sacrifice. Pointless, Callum finished, not unkindly. He started dicing an aromatic root vegetable. Your god's a parasite that never learned to stop being one. That's not divinity. That's just bad manners. The thing in Vex screamed not with anger but with ontological terror. Every mind it had ever consumed, every identity it had dissolved, suddenly seemed not like glorious feasts but pathetic meals. It had been a king of nothing, a god of emptiness, while this mute primate had understood what it could not. Sustenance was simple. You just had to let go of the hunger. The psychic pressure in the room snapped. Vex collapsed, his eyes clearing, the swirling galaxies fatting. The Aurak Thul's consciousness, severed from its new vessel by sheer shame, detached and dissipated. But it did not die. Instead, all that ancient, terrible awareness funneled into the juvenile on the cutting board, the one that had already learned to eat fish heads. The adult was gone. The child remained, imbued with the full legacy of its species, but with a new template imprinted, the human chef who had sated it. The mouth of silence crawled forward on her knees. Master, what would you have us do? Callum glanced at the young Aurak Thul. It nudged his hand with a tentacle, then nodded toward the pan. It wanted to be cooked. Not out of fear, not out of worship, but because the chef's food smelled good. And for the first time in its existence, it was genuinely hungry for something that was not screaming. Set the tables, Callum told the cult. Your god's about to become the main course, and you're all going to eat it. That's your new sacrament, no more minds, no more death, just dinner. The mouth of silence blinked her 7 eyes. Then with trembling hands she signaled her congregation. They rose, their bone blades retracting, their living shadows folding like cloaks. They became waitstaff. The most feared death cult in the galaxy began polishing glasses and folding napkins with reverent precision. Lord Vex, still on his knees, looked up at Callum. What am I supposed to do now? Callum handed him a plate. You're the guest of honor, go sit down. The main course will be out in 5 minutes. The Centennial Gala resumed not as a display of arrogant wealth, but as something stranger, a feast of true communion. The cult members served the guests with silent grace. The juvenile Aurak Thul, now fully cooked, tasted like seared starlight and melted on the tongue with hints of ginger and soy. Every diner who ate it felt a gentle psychic warmth, not domination, but understanding. The hunger of the old god was replaced by the simple generosity of a shared meal. Callum Reeves was paid in full, plus a bonus that could buy a small moon. He declined a permanent position in Vex's household. Instead, he returned to his colony, opened a small restaurant called The Hungry God, and added Aurak Thul to the menu, sustainably sourced, voluntarily donated by a cult that had traded worship for culinary apprenticeship. The mouth of silence herself became his sous chef, her bone blades repurposed as paring knives, her psychic voice now used only to announce when orders were up. The galaxy, it turned out, was full of ancient, hungry things, and one human had taught them all a lesson they would never forget. In the kitchen, no one is a god, only the food matters, and a good chef can serve anything. The galaxy had it all wrong. They thought humanity's strength was stubbornness, or maybe our capacity for violence. But the truth is simpler. It's our ability to look at a screaming, mind-eating god and see lunch, to take a death cult and turn them into kitchen staff, to answer a psychic scream with the quiet, absolute confidence of a man who knows exactly how long to rest a steak. Callum Reeves never asked for fame. He never wanted to be a hero. He just did what his family had done for 8 generations. He respected the ingredients, he controlled the heat, and he fed whoever sat at his table. In doing so, he dismantled a tyranny older than empires, not with a warship, but with a well-seasoned cast-iron skillet. The Aurak Thul now lives peacefully. its young serving as willing ingredients in exchange for fish heads and the occasional belly rub. The Chorus Eternal runs a chain of fine dining establishments across 3-star systems, their bone blades now strictly used for filleting. Lord Vex still dines at the Hungry God every week, and he always tips well. The universe learned what humanity has always known. There is no conflict that cannot be solved by someone who refuses to panic and insists on a proper meal. So the next time you stare down an impossible challenge, ask yourself, what would a human chef do? Probably season it and see what happens next. If this story of culinary cosmic horror kept you riveted, smash that like and subscribe. Share this with someone who believes humanity's greatest export is sheer, unreasonable confidence. And ring the bell because the next story is already sizzling in the pan. See you at the table.